the star of the show is the whole ecosystem.
Mm.
Like when I think of the very good, I think the whole thing is very good, you know, and humans aren't very good unless the whole thing's very good.
Greetings, friends. It is mid-October, and we've officially reached that time of the year where I put on my hoodie, and it pretty much stays on my body like an extra layer of skin until like early May or something. It's just so good. Hoodies are so good. If you live in a part of the world where hoodies aren't a thing for some reason, or it's too hot, just ultimate compassion. Like, I am so sorry. Hoodies are it's just too good. Actually, I think in Genesis 3, like after the fall, when God was like, hey, Adam and Eve, get some clothes on, and it says he gave them some garments, I'm pretty sure those were hoodies. It's just that good. Anyway, I'm here for it. Today, we continue our eco-Christian journey with a dear friend, professor of environmental justice, urban farmer, expert composter, vegetable grower, goat whisperer, and master of his craft, Jason Adkins. Today, we're getting down into the questions of what is environmental justice? And really, who are we in relation to all of this? We're here exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. I'm Caleb Cray Haynes, and this is the Eco-Christian Podcast.
I like to call you Farmer Jason, but I don't know if you like to go by Farmer Jason, but Jason Adkins, everybody.
Hey, Caleb. Good to be here.
Absolutely. We are, Jason not only does everything he does, which we're going to get into, but is, I'm fortunate enough to live down the street from Jason, so I get to bug him in person. So here we are, we're sitting in an office next to Urban Farm that he works at. Yeah, I'm tempted to give a really long bio, but maybe instead you could just tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Yeah. Well, I am the director of the Trevecca Urban Farm, and we have a constellation of growing works on and around campus where we seek to create imaginative spaces where people can begin to see and put their hands on what it would look like to care for the earth and to make our place sing with life. So that looks like a herd of Tennessee fainting goats, a small herd of ducks. No, it's a flock. If you're herding ducks, you're in the wrong business. We got a flock of chickens. We have 3 guardian dogs. We have some bees and some worms and some hogs, as well as a big garden and an extensive orchard in and around campus. And connected to that, we have some programs that are housed in the academics of Trevecca University. So I teach environmental justice courses for legitimate school credit. And then some other teachings that we have for high school students, tours for middle and elementary school students. And we're just trying to build an army of earth keepers and meet them at whatever developmental stage or whatever awareness stage they are and take them up a step or 2 or 5 as we have the opportunity. So that's what I do here in a skeletal description.
I love that. I wonder if, so by that description, you manage, manage, or maybe you have another term there that you use for the Trevecca Urban Farm, Christian University here in Nashville, but you also teach environmental justice. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Awesome. Would you be willing to share, I guess, maybe peel another layer back from your story, but share a bit of your own quote unquote eco-Christian trajectory and, however brief or long you'd like to share that about kind of how it came about for you?
For sure. So for me, I've always been brought up conservatively. And for my family, that didn't just mean like moral conservatism, but a lot of my upbringing was around my grandfather, who was a Depression-era Kentucky boy who learned to save everything, value everything, turn off every light, repurpose things. And that's how I was raised. And so that's all, it gets kind of baked into who I am, is like this person that just has been taught to conserve everything. And so conservatism looked like that for me. And so it always surprised me when conservatism looked like waste or made alliances with waste, because I think as a conservative should conserve. And that's one thing that we like to bring out to folks that come from a conservative background, is that conservation is in our name, right? If we want to keep it, which we don't have to, but if we do, we should live up to it. And so being raised outdoors in the woods, on hikes, camping, these things were part of my upbringing. You know, there wasn't a congruence necessarily with the way I was brought up, politically conservative, with, conservation out in the world. Aside from what I've spoken of, there seemed to be some sort of enmity between the left-leaning earth lovers, tree huggers, and good conservative folks. And however, when I got through college and began to work with men in recovery from addiction and alcoholism, addiction from with alcohol, drugs, and recovery from homelessness, I started farming with them. And the way I kind of approach things is I read. I love reading to figure things out. So I, go to the library, check out every book I could, check out my limit of books on gardening. And embedded in some of those books were messages about care for the earth, like a permaculture book. One book I got a hold of early was Gardening for the Future of the Earth, which highlighted permaculture growers like Bill Mollison and Masanobu Fukuoka, or Alan York, who was featured in The Biggest Little Farm late in his life. And all these folks like John Jevons, who was really trying to figure out how can we feed the most people on the smallest possible area of soil. And then people like Wendell Berry, who was talking about how the use of the earth is determined primarily by how we farm, finally by how we eat. So he would say how we eat determines to a great extent how the earth is used. And these larger issues of conservation, the loss of topsoil, the loss of biodiversity, the loss of our food security, the gathering into a very small number of hands the power to eat, these issues became important to me. Were raised for the first time in my life and became important to me. And so all of a sudden, the early 2000s, I was kind of dawning on me that the most important thing I could do as a Christian, as someone who loved my neighbor and including the non-human neighbors that were quickly dying, was to become a good farmer and to train good farmers. And so that's how these issues came to me. I come from an unusual angle in that really my conservation and ecological sensitivity was born out of a desire to farm and my training in becoming that kind of farmer.
Yeah, I was thinking about your entry point being the soil and how meaningful that is. And I think that is maybe not or maybe it is. I don't have a pulse on everyone's entry point, but it seems to me that as appropriate as it is, humanity's entry point into this whole thing is bringing it back to the starting place of our relationship with the ground, which there's a lot of irony with that. It's what we rely on continually. We walk on it, we eat from it and everything, and we also just don't think about it all at the same time.
Yeah.
So you're kind of speaking to kind of, and maybe we're 3 levels down from what here in the first 5 minutes, but your relationship with this organism or organisms, right, that make up topsoil, that make up soil, in a relationship of either wastefulness, obviously how we eat, how we, what we consume from it. So before we get too far down into that, you teach environmental justice. And so I wonder if that isn't a good place to start. Here we are, listeners, class day one, trying not to get a D, and give us something there about where would you start defining or trying to help us understand or describing environmental justice?
Yeah. So one of the stories I love to tell about environmental justice, which I'll tell before I give a sort of definition that we could all tweak, because I'm not wedded to any singular definition of it. And it becomes a thing that as you begin to see it, you can't stop seeing it. Those things when you start, a concept will kind of alert you to realities in the world that, oh, there it is, and there it is, and there it is. So my director of the Center for Social Justice, Jamie Kassler, and I were in South Africa. We went to Soweto, where Nelson Mandela lived and worked for many decades. And there was a coal-fired plant there that had been decommissioned and turned into actually it was a bungee jumping space. Between the two towers, cooling towers, there was a bungee, what am I trying to say? The little bridge between them off which you would jump. Right. Hopefully not to your death.
Yeah. Which you did, right?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
I looked at it. I witnessed it.
Yeah.
But it was enough for the story.
Sure.
Which is that this power plant was actually created for the white South Africans who were upwind from this plant, this power plant. So downwind from this power plant were the villages of Soweto, which was a shanty town, built out of spare pieces of corrugated metal and cardboard, and what would happen was they'd fire up this coal-fired plant. The prevailing wind would take the coal ash and would dump it on the Soweto population. So the poorest people in this area are getting coal ash dumped on them. They're, respiratory diseases, cancer, all that.
Wow.
Upwind from this plant, the electricity flowed to the white families of South Africa. This is in Johannesburg. So you see the benefits of this environmental disaster, of this environmental detriment, flow to the powerful, the wealthy, which is denominated by class and race, and the burdens of this environmental disaster flow to the poorest people who can ill afford to bear the weight of poor health. And the people in Soweto did not have electricity. So they're having just to bear the burdens, and the white families in Johannesburg were taking the electricity. So it was as clear a picture as I've ever seen of environmental racism, where the benefits of our environmental burdens are borne by those in power. The detriments of those environmental burdens are borne by those who least benefit from them. So that's kind of what we see, and we see it everywhere. So we see, the Congo being torn apart by for coltan and other rare earth metals. Viral videos about cocoa farmers tasting chocolate for the first time in their adult lives, right? So this separation of products from the people that produce them, and people have to live in devastated environments for the sake of other people who are powerful. They don't receive the benefits of those gifts. So there's the general understanding of oh, wow, we're trashing the planet. We're doing so much harm to the oceans. And then there's another lens by which we say, well, who benefits from this and who has to carry the burdens? And what we see consistently is this environmental racism or environmental injustices around the world, where not only do we see it through an environmental lens, but we ask, what is the sociological dimension? What is the social dimension of these environmental problems. And that's where we see environmental racism, which is the opposite of environmental justice. So environmental justice is anywhere where that cycle is being interrupted. And it can be conceived as I've already stated it, but it can also be widened out and say, like, not only humans, but how do we include all members of creation in the justice that is the birthright of every living thing? So not only if we were trashing the planet, but the gifts were equitably distributed between what is now rich and poor, or between different racially denominated groups, would that be justice? Would that be environmental justice? Well, finally, of course, no. And finally, you can't have healthy humans on a planet that's trashed every other kind of life. So it's a self-defeating mentality, thinking humans first. So narrowly, it began as a concern for how is the trash in our environment distributed? Oh, yeah, very inequitably. And more broadly, it's about how do we share life and health and thriving with all creatures, and how is that interrelationship nurtured, that inescapable relationship nurtured?
That's a really, I think, helpful framework to crack the egg open for us, I guess you could say, of environmental care and environmental justice and understanding the issues. Because I think a lot of times we start, and it's not a wrong place to start, like we start with, obviously climate change or plastic or et cetera. But really the thing behind the thing is these sins, I guess, maybe we should just name it, these disparities, these places and times and locations where one group becomes oppressed, at the expense of another group's advantage. I've been marinating a lot on some of this recently from kind of a different perspective. I'm tempted to not go there, but we'll do it anyway. But reading one of the texts, lectionary texts recently, and it was, out of Matthew 20, I believe, and it's Jesus' parable about the day laborers, right? And and it's like he hires someone like 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, noon, 3 p.m. Then because because there's not enough, the landowner goes out and hires someone again, like late in the day at like 5 p.m. And so Jesus is telling this parable, and then at the end of this parable, it says that the landowner pays everyone the same. Right, everyone gets the day wage, and I love this story because it just confronts so much. Because you really, I think, if we're honest, like almost we all hear that, and like all we can think about is this is not fair. Like the inequity or inequality, is what jumps off the page for us. And then all of a sudden, we're confronted with all these notions that we're bringing to the table about fairness. Anyway, maybe we're off in the weeds, but I've been thinking about this in relation to like God being the true owner of creation, and us being just stewards. And John Wesley says quite a bit about that, especially in his The Good Steward, his sermon on that. And this, I feel like there's all through the Gospels, but particularly in several of Jesus' parables, there's almost this reframing, it seems, that he's offering us about, look, this is all God's, and you are stewards. And what does it mean that there's enough for everyone? Maybe not enough, maybe not an appropriate or enough for everyone to have like great abundance. And I wonder if there's some of this gospel of abundance, this abundantness is where we get stuck, juxtapositioning enough with almost scarcity and abundance as like the good life. Anyway, I'm way down the rabbit hole here, but
I like it. I mean, it's something I've never thought about before in that instance is like, why were the people picked last? Why were they picked last? Like, it feels like like the softball team in middle school where like, the ones picked last are the least desirable folks. And so, a lot of times we think, oh, those lazy people that came late and got paid the same, they didn't really put in a full day's work. But isn't it kind of beautiful to think about like those who we did not include at first were finally included and they have equal standing, right? And that has a lot of implications.
Yeah.
Right? Even thinking about the global majority, which, the global minority is calling the shots, but like to bring in the voices of indigenous people and to say like your voice has equal standing would be a major improvement, since about 80 to 90% of the world's biodiversity is on indigenous lands. Like if they had full indigenous rights, we'll say full pay, what would we be able to do, right, for the health of the planet if their rights and voice were respected? So I've never really thought about that till you kind of retold it, but like, who's the last voices to be brought into this work? They were the first to do the work. And the last to, often the last to come to receive for that work or to receive their place in that work, which is just a riff. I mean, it's not necessarily what Jesus was saying, but it's kind of riffing off that parable.
Yeah. No, I think that's kind of where I'm kind of drawing in or honing in on, I guess, if anything, is that, and I think even he reiterates it at the end of the parable. It's like the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And so tell me where you go from there, as far as fleshing that out for perhaps more of our context here.
Well, yeah, we've got this really rich history in the North American church for dealing with environmental injustices and justice, environmental racism. It's a short history, but the modern idea of environmental justice was born out of a movement that the Church of Christ in North Carolina spearheaded. Some churches realized that, hey, they want to put a toxic dump in yet another Black neighborhood. I wonder where we find all the toxic dumps. And they did a study and unsurprisingly found that they were all in Black neighborhoods, or practically all, right? And so they sued the state, and there's a long story, but when you're talking about people standing in front of trucks to keep them from advancing and poisoning yet another neighborhood. This is leadership in the church. This was kind of the birth of the idea of environmental justice. Robert Bulliard down in Texas, who has written many books, really the foundational books about environmental justice, was down in Houston doing the same kind of studies at the same kind of time, actually mapping as an urban geographer and an environmental geographer. Where are these things showing up? They're unsurprisingly in communities that cannot defend themselves, in Black communities that are suffering from poverty, which in the United States often maps on very well, to one another, race and wealth. So Robert was down there, I'll call him Robert, doing his work. There were Christians in North Carolina doing their work, who were as a church organization. This was something the church felt like that was their business, and now it's a discipline. They've journals of environmental justice and lots of books, but we need to remember that the church cared enough at that point to stand up for people that were being trampled by the powerful, and this isn't a new concern. You go all the way back, and you see that the people of God have been driven into the ground over stealing of resources, right? I mean, for most of its history, the people of Israel are a colony of wealthier nations, and their wealth is being extracted. The cedars of Lebanon cut down and carted off to some king's super project, the land being farmed to death. And so issues around land conservation and the democratic use of that land are foundational to the law of Moses, right? So you have, why? Because as you said, the earth is the Lord's. It's not yours to trash. Like a lot of the ideas I inherited around land that are like, if it's yours, you can trash it, burn it, dig it up, whatever you want. It's yours, right? Those are Roman ideas. They're not Jewish ideas or Christian ideas. Those are basically like codified in Roman law. And we still hold those like they're God's own truth. But they're not what God taught the people of Israel about land. God taught the people of Israel that you have to rest the land. You have to respect its capacities. If you farm it too hard, you farm it out. You kill the land. And if you happen to lose it by bad luck or bad judgment, every 50 years it goes back to your family so that the accumulation of wealth does not lead to runaway wealth inequality, because the land was what was distributed. It wasn't a distribution of money, because land could produce the food. Everything that was necessary for life could come from that land if it was treated carefully. I mean, the people of Israel lived on a fragile piece of land. It could easily be farmed into ruin. And so there were strict, Levitical laws around its use. And so the conservation of land, the consciousness of its capacity, environmental justices and environmental racism was something that happened from the beginning of the story of the people of God. And it was always guarded against carefully by any community, not just Israeli community, but any community anywhere that wanted to stay indefinitely on a piece of land. Because ultimately the health of the land is our own health. And if we neglect it, we implant in our own culture the seed of its ruin.
Wow. That's really helpful. I'm thinking about several instances throughout, particularly the Old Testament, right, where, and honestly, too many to name, where we are intrinsically connected with the land, as a people, and all the way back to Abraham, right, or Abram and Sarah, and that whole narrative, and what it means for the Israelites, go in captivity, become landless, spend 40 years in the wilderness, and so it's the context in which our whole story really unfolds. Ironically, again, I suppose, like sort of opened up saying it's like the ground that we're always walking on and depending upon, but aren't necessarily acknowledging, is sort of land also in the Old Testament and onward, is the backdrop and the setting, the Sitz im Leben, as some professors used to say, or do say, the context for the whole story. And so I wonder if you'd be willing to share, we're kind of hinting on it, I guess, but maybe what are some helpful or sort of go-to theological underpinnings, or maybe scriptures that you like to reference or that you find helpful when sort of connecting these dots?
I think that one thing is I usually open with scripture, right? I feel like anybody that has been gripped by the love of Jesus can look around at the reality of things and just feel wrong about it. Like, in a sense, not like I can start with Genesis and make a case for environmental care or environmental justice. But I had this sort of illusion that if I could just do that, I could convince sort of non-believing believers to just embrace the care of the earth and the neighbors that they support, both human and non-human, right?
Right.
But I mean, come on, when you find out that like Congolese kids are in an open pit mine for the sake of my cell phones and your electric car, anybody schooled in the love of Jesus or even, basic sense of justice or dignity is like, that is wrong. Like, what are we going to do about that, right? So I really feel like it's often the stories of what is happening to the earth and its people and its other creatures that just move us, right? To being like, oh, no, like,
right.
Almost like the sermon in the second chapter of Acts, where the people who heard Peter's words were cut to the heart and they say, brothers, what will we do? When you hear the stories, that's kind of like, I think what people moved by the Spirit, like, are ultimately moved too. And then to sort of like put it in context of our faith, we remember like our lovely Genesis story, which we'll like endlessly mine for goodness, where we see like humans are latecomers to this beautiful creation. Like we're the last children of creation. And a lot of times we treat that like, how when you're like, it's your birthday and your mom's like, save this present for last because it's the coolest, you don't want to open the Jordans first. And that's kind of how we think about ourselves. Like we're the Jordans of the birthday party, like the awesome sneakers or the BB gun. But honestly, we're here last, and then maybe we could think that, but maybe we could think something else, which is like we need everything else that was in place, or we don't live. Like drop us in day 3 and see how well humans like survive, right?
Yeah.
Drop us into day 4, 5, 6. Like we are apex predators. We are on top of a very delicate mountain, and it's like a mountain built out of pebbles, right? If we don't behave ourselves here at the top, we're going to undermine our base, and we're not going to have a place to live. So like as people who depend on the intricacy of creation, on the integrity of this intricate connection, we should be very careful, not just for our survival, but for the, which is very real, but also for the sake of that in which we have been given stewardship and for which we will be held accountable to have shown, in biblical terms, the master who will return and say, what have you done with what I gave you? Do you have more than what I gave you? Actually, humanity, there's not a character in that parable for us, for the wise and foolish stewards who are given like talents to take care of while the master was away. Like if the master came to us, we would be an entirely different character. We wouldn't say, yeah, we buried this and we've got the whole thing. We would say, actually, we lost. Like we gambled it in Vegas and we came back with a fraction of what you had, because there's only 10% of the biodiversity left in our farm system. It's only 4% of the forests in North America that we used to have. Like we have less than what we were given. And so if we took that parable of Jesus seriously, it would be occasion for fear and trembling. But we want to be the kind of people who can multiply what we have been given, even if it's less than it used to be. And I think that's encouraging, is that humans can finally be not just a subtraction from the goodness of creation. We can take what we're given, we can make more out of it. That's the genius of being an observant, careful human. We can make ourselves useful in this system. It is possible. And we do see really encouraging examples of that. And most of them are indigenous leaders and people and peasant farmers around the world who are holding together our fragile ecosystem at great cost to their own personal lives and without any official support.
Yeah. I think that what you're naming and stories like that is simultaneously obviously striking, depressing, but hopeful and encouraging in that we know, like we quite know that, similarly to principles of permaculture and the goods that even a small farm can do, that a single life, a single patch of healthy topsoil, a single farm, workplace, whatever it is, you insert it, small area can create and regenerate lots of good. And that's sort of the secret sauce, the secret seed planted in the whole thing, baked into the whole thing, is that the earth is incredibly resilient and forgiving. Now, obviously, tread lightly there, and because the only reason, and maybe this is more than we want to get into, but the only reason we're doing as well as we are today, it is because of how resilient the earth is. And that I hear part of that in what you're saying. We now know that the ocean has spent the last few decades absorbing the majority of the extra heat that we've been putting in the atmosphere from anthropogenic carbon emissions. So, that grace has been happening under our noses, and God's grace, nonetheless. You know what I'm saying? Like, not that the ocean is God, but like God created. Like, this is how it's made, and to think about that all the way back to Genesis, I think is helpful. Resisting the temptation. I do appreciate what you say. Like, the temptation is to use Genesis in sort of an apologetic way. And if we all just understood Genesis a little bit better, and there's some truth there. Like, we need a healthy, grown-up version of the creation story.
Mm-hmm.
We had the felt board version. Let's get the grown-up version. But to think,
don't you wish they bring back felt board?
Can we get felt boards again?
Oh.
Like, why did I want puppets? Honestly,
yeah.
Like, just where did those go?
Where'd the fun go?
Where'd the fun
glory is departed.
Right. This is a very serious. How do we get so serious, Jason?
We didn't sign up for a non-felt board church.
Yeah,
I signed up for the felt board.
Yeah,
construction.
You can have altars too.
Yeah, I love altars.
Yeah, and felt.
It's
all
a
of
great
that.
place for tears. Yeah.
Yes. You saying the humanity created on the sixth day, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with that. Often growing up, I feel like I would hear this version that God created all this, said it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, and then on the sixth day, He created humanity. God created humanity and said, "Oh, that's very good."
Yeah.
But that's actually not what the Scripture says.
Yeah.
What it actually says is that God looked on all that God had made and called all of it very good.
Yeah.
As in, like, I don't even have words for it. Like, all of this together is creation, right? Day one building on day two, day 1 and 2 becoming day 3, day 1, 2, and 3 becoming 4, until now. Don't hear me wrong. I do think that there is to use your analogy, there is an Air Jordan situation. I'm going to say, maybe this is controversial, because God does create humanity in God's own image, right? Humanity is part of God's, and I don't even want to say it because it sounds too anthropocentric. Like, it sounds too because this is generally our problem. But like, God slam dunk into the thing, and then turns around and says, "Oh yeah, this area that the land and the water and the air, all of these spaces and creatures therein, you there, human, who I've created, we've created in our image," Genesis, right, 1:26 or 1:28, whichever it is, and take care of these areas. And then goes back to name each of those 3 areas as God commissions. And so humanity is part of the is like a holy steward amidst the ecosystem that is creation, and it's all interconnected. And maybe I'm saying that in a weird way in my head, because you're making this weird brow face. But
I'm just thinking about marketing this humanity is God's slam dunk, like T-shirts and bumper stickers.
Yeah.
I'm just trying. I'm already thinking through a business plan.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, we just got to monetize this
for a brow.
Yes, that's what
Yeah. I mean, I think about humans as more like the manager of the NBA All-Star team, because like, if we're not sort of running water to the right, people and making sure, then the team can't really play as well. But we're also on the team. We're on the team. Like, we get to wear the jersey. I'm just riffing off.
Yeah, sure this is like 1992 Chicago Bulls stuff.
Yeah. I feel like that manager is really important, But the star of the show is the whole ecosystem. Like, when I think of the very good, I think the whole thing is very good, And humans aren't very good unless the whole thing's very good. Like, We don't get to be here without everything else. Otherwise, extinction is terrifying, and we're starting to see what happens when you begin pulling threads out of this web of creation and pulling threads out. Eventually, you get negative feedback loops. And that's the depressing part. And we don't want to get too depressing. Let's keep this positive. What we do have is something called emergent properties. Shout out to Ryan and our friend who has a business named that accidentally. But emergent properties is this idea that if you do a few things right, you actually might get some spin-offs from that system that you didn't even expect. Like you put everything in place. And if you've ever seen The Biggest Little Farm, which I've already referenced, great film, you start seeing good things happen. Like they're like, oh no, what are we going to do about all these snails? Oh, look, ducks eat snails. Oh, now ducks are pooping. They're making the soil rich. And now snakes come in. They start eating the gophers and they start, and then hawks just come in and start eating all these birds that are eating their fruit. And these are emergent properties, like things you didn't even mean to happen, but you set it up right. And now you get these this like virtuous cycle of goodness, right? And I really think humans can kind of spin that top, and we can, we don't have to play all the instruments. We just have to kind of orchestrate them in a certain way that they come in at the right time and they make beautiful music. And as a farmer, I get to be kind of like the conductor. Like I bring in this animal and that animal. And it's interesting, like in farm, like agroecology, they say it takes about 7 years till your farm to really sort of create these emergent properties where it starts humming. At first, everything goes wrong, but eventually your biology comes in, your ecosystem kind of settles in, the things that eat the things come to eat the things, like your beneficial insects return, the depth of your soil emerges. And it was 7 years for me too. Like I felt like I was fighting everything. And I feel like after year 7, the flywheel was going and it was just powering through. And emergent properties started coming in. Allies started joining me. So what's awesome is the ecosystem. To me, that's the very good part of Genesis 1:27, 28, 29 is like God looked at all God had made, and together it was very good.
That's
like
the slam dunk.
It's not the humans.
Yeah.
It's the humans and everything else.
Yeah. Because there is no such thing as kind of like you're saying, like all these other days had to come before this day came, right? All these other things were essential to human life.
We're so fragile.
We're so fragile.
We don't appreciate how fragile we are. We act like the show wouldn't go on without us. It very can. And we need to be careful. Like there's been a show without, like according to Genesis 1 and geology and history of the earth,
right?
Most of the world's time has been without us, right?
Yeah.
In the Genesis story, it's 6/7 of the day of the week of creation, right? But in terms of if the history of the earth were at like a 12-hour clock, we would have been here in the last 3 minutes before midnight. And most of it's happened without us. Could go on without us. And we'd like to stick around because it's a beautiful show, but it is contingent on our stewardship. It always has been. Like the people, the inheritance of the land was contingent on faithful occupation of the land. It was contingent on justice and love and mercy. And when the prophets speak about why did the people lose the land, it's because they didn't keep the Sabbath. It's because they didn't take care of it, right? It's because they didn't take care of each other. And that continues to be the terms on which we continue to get to be a part of this.
Man, that's so much there. My friends, Jason is one of those people that we're going to hear from a few different times, Lord willing. And him and I'm sure could sit here for a very long time and continue on with this. But I think that's a really good end note here for us to marinate on in this episode and thinking about, what have you ever thought about your life that way? It's it's kind of different when you frame it that way, I think, and put it in the context of an ecosystem. And of course, once you start going down that rabbit hole, as you were saying, you kind of start seeing things light up all over the place, and it raises a whole another set of quite a few questions, really, that I hope and pray we get the opportunity to talk more about. So thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah. I like to offer folks a good nugget of takeaway at the end of each episode, maybe something practical that a person can do or be about or research or with their body, with their mind and heart. Have any thoughts?
Well, friends, I don't really know you, but I suspect you have some sort of passion. And whether it's watching birds or gardening, eating good food, I would start there. I would start at the place of your passion. So if you love diving, if you love mountaineering, if you like cooking, think about what it means to be an ecological steward, an earth keeper in the place of your strength and passion, because that's what you're going to take care of best. If I were to sort of create a general prescription, I would say start a garden. Like, there's really no better way, in my opinion, to begin to notice your weather, to notice your local ecosystem, to notice your connection and enact your connection to the land, than to grow something that's practical and delicious and take care of one of your needs out on a piece of land that's probably just being mown. And so, eat your lawn and find a way to create that useful connection through gardening. But even probably better yet, connect something you love with the love of creation and see it and enact it through that lens of caretaking. And I think that's the point at which you're going to be most passionate, most committed, and that you're also going to be able to share with other people how that particular part of your genius intersects with this charge to care for the earth and tend it.
That's really good.
Thanks for listening, y'all. Let's keep this thing alive. Follow us on socials, show us some love, leave a review, and hey, send me an email at ecochristianpodcast@gmail.com. Until then.